The sky rippled with a strange light as massive ships appeared overhead, their shapes vast and imposing against the backdrop of Earth's atmosphere. They hovered with a quiet power, as if daring anyone to challenge them. High Commander Zarth watched from the bridge of the flagship, a cold smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He had expected this to be easy. Earth's defenses were primitive, their weapons crude and outdated. He knew the outcome before they had even arrived. The planet would fall within hours. It was inevitable, and yet something gnawed at the edges of his confidence, something he couldn't quite place. His thoughts were interrupted as the ship's communication system flickered on. A voice crackled through the speakers. The human leader, Captain Sarah Lee, her defiance clear in her tone as she addressed the invading force. "This is Earth speaking. You are not welcome here. You will leave now or face the consequences of your actions." Zarth blinked in surprise. No one had ever spoken to him like that. No one had dared such defiance before. He had planned to crush them swiftly, but this human, her words sparked something in him, something he hadn't expected. The audacity of it, the challenge, it stirred a sense of unease deep within his chest. It was a feeling he couldn't name, but one he would soon come to regret. Across the globe, humans were reacting to the alien arrival differently than anyone had anticipated. Panic was quickly turning to resolve. People were coming together across nations. Governments were scrambling to respond. Yet despite the chaos, a strange sense of unity began to take hold. It was as if the invasion had unlocked something primal within humanity, something that told them they would not go down without a fight. Sarah Lee stood before the world, her voice steady as she spoke again. "We will not surrender. Earth belongs to its people, and we will fight for it to our last breath." Zarth could see it in her eyes, the determination, the refusal to yield, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this would be unlike anything he had ever encountered. A wave of resistance was building now. Even as Zarth gave the order for the first strike to begin, the aliens unleashed a barrage of weapons that tore through Earth's defenses. The first wave of attacks struck cities around the world in quick succession. The sky lit up with fiery explosions as buildings crumbled beneath the relentless onslaught. Yet even in the face of destruction, people did not flee. They rallied. Those who survived quickly organized into makeshift units. They formed guerrilla forces and resisted where they could. As the chaos unfolded in cities across the planet, Sarah Lee watched the destruction unfold on a screen before her. She had never imagined her world could come to this, not so quickly. Yet her resolve hardened. It would take more than firepower to break humanity's spirit. She knew this in her bones. The world was rallying around the idea that no matter what came next, they would fight. They would never let Earth fall. She turned to her team gathered around her in the command center. "We may be outmatched, but we are not outwitted. They've made a mistake, and we will make them regret it," she said, her voice carrying authority and certainty. "They have underestimated us, and that will be their downfall." As the first wave of destruction continued, Sarah's team prepared to strike back. Small groups of resistance fighters began to appear across the globe using the tools and technology they had at their disposal, fighting in ways the aliens had not predicted. They knew this would not be an easy fight, but it was one they were prepared to face together, united in purpose and spirit. The aliens had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back. In the wake of their first devastating strike, the invaders assumed that the planet would crumble under their firepower, but what they didn't account for was the human spirit, the fight that refused to die out despite the overwhelming odds. In every corner of the world, pockets of resistance were beginning to form, small but determined groups of survivors who took to the streets armed with whatever they could find, and even without advanced weaponry, they fought fiercely. Every time the aliens made a move, humanity responded with something they had never seen before: resourcefulness. Sarah Lee and her team were no strangers to combat, but this was different. They were fighting an enemy whose technology was decades ahead of anything Earth had developed. Yet they had something the aliens couldn't replicate: a willingness to improvise and adapt. When they infiltrated an alien base for the first time, they knew they were taking a massive risk, but the odds didn't matter to them. This was their home, and they weren't going to let it fall without a fight. Aiden, the young hacker who had managed to scramble the aliens' communications during the first strike, was proving invaluable now. His skills were allowing Earth's forces to learn more about the alien technology with each passing day. As Sarah and her team advanced deeper into alien territory, they discovered that their new allies were not just skilled fighters, but also brilliant minds. The stolen alien tech began to reveal its secrets to them faster than expected, and each discovery brought them closer to a way to defeat their attackers. Sarah stood at the front of a makeshift command center surrounded by a mix of military officers and scientists working together for the first time with a sense of unity that hadn't existed before. They understood one another's strengths, and for once they weren't fighting each other for power or resources. They were fighting for Earth. They were fighting for survival. "We can win this," she said, her voice steady, but there was fire in her eyes as she looked over the gathered team. "But only if we stick together." Meanwhile, the alien forces were in disarray. Zarth had underestimated the humans in a way that made him feel uneasy. Reports of Earth's growing resistance were flooding in. His officers told him that Earth's military had begun to adapt to their tactics. They weren't just blindly running into battles anymore. They were beginning to strategize in ways the aliens couldn't anticipate. At first, the Gorthai believed that they would easily crush any resistance, but this was different. Earth was fighting back with a ferocity Zarth had never seen in any species before. Their resistance wasn't just tactical, it was cultural, a fight for their way of life. In the heart of one of the besieged cities, Sarah Lee and her team executed a daring raid on an alien staging ground. They had one goal: disable the alien warship before it could launch more attacks on Earth's already weakened defenses. The ship was unlike anything they had seen before, but Sarah and her team worked with precision. They infiltrated the enemy vessel using the shadows to avoid detection. With Aiden's guidance, they found the weak spots in the ship's design and quickly set to work planting explosives. The hours felt like days as they moved through the ship, but their efforts paid off when the explosives went off. A chain reaction rippled through the ship, causing it to tear apart in the atmosphere and crash to the ground. The explosion sent a message to the aliens: Earth was not going to fall easily. Zarth watched as the ship fell from the sky, the first real blow to his forces in weeks. The loss was significant. But it was more than just a loss of resources. It was a loss of pride. The humans had not only fought back, but had done so in a way that caught them off guard. The message was clear: the war was not over, and Earth was not done fighting. As the days passed, the tide of the war began to shift in subtle but undeniable ways. The aliens, once so confident in their superiority, now found themselves struggling against a planet they had underestimated. What was meant to be an easy conquest had become a bloody and drawn-out struggle. The human spirit was proving to be a force more resilient than anything Zarth had anticipated. Earth's resistance was no longer just about military strikes or sabotage. It was about unity. People from every corner of the globe, former enemies, distant allies, were coming together, setting aside their differences in a single unified cause: survival. The global response was nothing short of extraordinary. Sarah Lee watched as world leaders, once divided by politics and power struggles, now stood together. The United Nations transformed from a symbol of bureaucracy to a symbol of collective will. They shared resources, exchanged intelligence, and coordinated efforts in a way that had never been seen before. It was a world in crisis, yet humanity was at its best when faced with the worst. In the command center, Sarah's team worked tirelessly, the exhaustion on their faces evident, but their resolve unwavering. They weren't just fighting back, they were learning. With each encounter, they found new ways to exploit the Gorthai's weaknesses, using their own technology against them. Aiden's hacking skills had become indispensable, feeding the resistance with vital intel that allowed them to anticipate alien moves and make strategic strikes where they would be most effective. As Sarah reviewed the latest intelligence, she felt a growing sense of hope. They were no longer just reacting. They were taking control. The tide was turning, but they had to press on. The alien forces had not been defeated yet, and the Gorthai's leadership was far from surrendering. Zarth, in particular, refused to acknowledge the possibility of failure. He was enraged by the idea that humans, a species he had considered insignificant, could stand against him and his advanced civilization. On Earth's side, a key decision had been made. They would launch a coordinated attack on an alien facility in the heart of one of the largest occupied cities. The objective was clear: disable a crucial weapon the aliens were constructing, one capable of devastating entire continents. If the humans could destroy it, they would cripple the Gorthai's ability to continue their assault. Sarah knew the risks were immense. The aliens had established tight security around the weapon, and the chances of success were slim. But as she stood before her team, looking into the eyes of the men and women who had become more than just soldiers, they were a family. She knew they had no choice. This mission could turn the war in humanity's favor, or it could be their last. "We've come too far to back down now," she thought as she addressed her team. There was no more room for fear or hesitation. This was their chance to strike a blow that the aliens would never forget. Aiden had already begun working on the tech side of the mission, tapping into the alien communication network to create a temporary window of vulnerability. Earth's forces would have one shot at this, and everything had to go perfectly. As the team gathered their gear and prepared to leave, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. They were no longer just defending their planet. They were fighting for something much larger. They were fighting for their future, their families, and their very existence. With a final nod to her team, Sarah spoke the words that had become the rallying cry of their resistance. For Earth, they would strike hard and fast, no matter what awaited them on the other side. There was no turning back now. The mission was set into motion, and the team moved quickly, operating in near silence as they infiltrated the heart of the alien-held city. Sarah Lee led her squad with a sense of urgency that had only intensified since the last successful raid. Each step they took felt heavier, knowing the risks but also understanding the significance of what they were about to do. The aliens had grown complacent, overconfident in their technological advantage, but humanity had learned to exploit their weaknesses. The sabotage of their weapon would deal a blow they might never recover from. What Sarah didn't know yet was that there was more to the unfolding situation than the Gorthai had planned. The message from the Zorathi, a race of aliens who had been secretly rebelling against the Gorthai leadership, was a twist in the plot she hadn't expected. They were tired of the Gorthai's ruthless conquest, and after observing humanity's defiance, they had realized that Earth's fight was their own. The Zorathi saw in the human struggle the same drive for freedom they had fought for across the stars. A clandestine meeting was arranged, and Sarah, aware of the risk, agreed to meet the Zorathi envoy at a neutral location within the alien-controlled zone. The decision wasn't made lightly. Alliances with alien factions were fraught with danger, especially in the midst of a galactic war. But desperation had led humanity to consider all options, and the prospect of weakening the Gorthai from within could shift the balance of power entirely. The Zorathi commander, Varys, stood before Sarah, his tall, lithe form clad in dark armor that shimmered with strange symbols. His eyes, though alien, held a sense of earnestness that caught Sarah's attention. "Humanity's fight is just," he said, his voice low but firm. "We know what it is like to be crushed beneath the boot of the Gorthai. You are not alone in this war." Sarah didn't trust easily, especially not after so many alien lies and betrayals. But Varys' sincerity, combined with the undeniable signs of a rebellion forming within the Gorthai ranks, made her reconsider her initial hesitation. She listened closely as he explained the Gorthai leadership's internal fractures, how their empire was held together by fear and a tight grip on power, but it was unraveling. Zarth's rule had alienated more than just the Zorathi. Many of the lesser factions under the Gorthai banner were ripe for revolt. "Their unity is a lie," Varys continued. "The cracks are there. Your resistance can be the catalyst that shatters their empire." In exchange for critical intelligence on the Gorthai supply lines, weapons caches, and internal weaknesses, the Zorathi asked for a chance to strike from within. If humanity could provide the right kind of distraction, the Zorathi could coordinate a rebellion inside the alien forces, hitting them from both sides. The alliance, though fragile, could be the key to winning this war. Sarah weighed the options carefully. She could turn her back on this opportunity and risk the mission failing, or she could take the leap and trust the Zorathi. They didn't have the luxury of time. The Gorthai were too powerful, too entrenched. She extended her hand to Varys, sealing the deal with a simple gesture that would shape the future of this war. "We strike together," Sarah said, her voice resolute. "We finish what we started. For Earth and for your people." The Zorathi commander nodded, a rare, thin smile crossing his face. "Then it begins." Back in the command center, Earth's forces began preparing for a coordinated attack on an alien weapons facility, the one Sarah and her team had been targeting for days. Aiden had cracked open the security grid, and now they had everything they needed to initiate the assault. But this time, they weren't going in alone. The Zorathi had infiltrated the inner circles of the Gorthai, and their intelligence would guide humanity's next move. As Sarah's team geared up for the operation, a quiet sense of optimism settled over the command center. The fight was far from over, but now they had allies, and that made all the difference. They had a chance, a real chance. The alliance with the Zorathi brought an unexpected surge of confidence to Earth's forces, but it also introduced a new set of risks. Humanity was now part of a larger galactic struggle, and while the prospect of weakening the Gorthai from within was enticing, it meant that their enemies would soon become aware of this new threat. Zarth would not take the betrayal of his own kind lightly, and the Gorthai were a ruthless species. Any sign of weakness would be met with overwhelming force. But for now, the moment of opportunity had arrived. Sarah Lee stood at the head of a newly formed task force, a mix of elite soldiers from various countries and the Zorathi rebels, ready to launch a full-scale assault on the alien weapons facility. The target was a massive installation, one of the Gorthai's central hubs for producing energy weapons that could obliterate entire continents. If they succeeded in disabling it, they would cripple the aliens' ability to continue their conquest. The intelligence they had gathered from the Zorathi was invaluable. The facility was heavily guarded, with layers of defense that would be difficult to breach. But with the element of surprise on their side and a carefully coordinated strike planned, Sarah's team was confident they could pull it off. Aiden had hacked into the facility's security systems, finding a gap in their defenses that would give them a brief window of vulnerability. As they boarded their transports, Sarah couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. It was the largest operation they had undertaken since the Gorthai arrived, and the stakes had never been higher. But with the help of the Zorathi, they had something that the aliens didn't understand: unity. Across the world, humans were fighting in small but increasingly organized groups, sharing resources, intelligence, and support. Even the civilians, who had once been terrified and helpless, now stood as part of a growing resistance network. People who had never held a weapon were making traps and improvised explosives, using the resources they had to fight back. This wasn't just a military operation, it was a revolution. Earth was no longer simply defending itself, it was actively pushing back, and the Gorthai were starting to realize that they might not win this war after all. As the task force neared the facility, Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. Every move had to be calculated. Any mistake could lead to disaster. The assault would be launched in 3 waves. The first wave would focus on breaching the outer defenses, the second would disable the facility's communication network, and the third would target the core reactor powering the energy weapons. It was a complex plan, but it was their best shot. The first wave hit just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the alien facility. Explosions rocked the perimeter as Earth's forces swarmed in, using the darkness to their advantage. The Zorathi rebels fought with unmatched precision, their knowledge of Gorthai technology making them invaluable assets. They moved swiftly, disabling energy shields and cutting off the aliens' ability to respond effectively. As Sarah led her team deeper into the facility, a sense of urgency began to build. Every second counted. They were close to the reactor now, but the facility's inner defenses were far stronger than expected. Alarm bells rang through the complex as the Gorthai scrambled to mount a defense, but it was too late. The Zorathi had already disabled the main security grid, giving Earth's forces the opening they needed. In the heart of the facility, Sarah's team planted the explosives that would cripple the core reactor. As they moved to retreat, one of her soldiers, a young sergeant named Ortiz, spotted something that made his heart stop. A countdown timer on the reactor, far more advanced than anything they had anticipated. If they didn't get out of the facility in the next few minutes, the entire installation would go up in a nuclear-like explosion that could wipe out a city. The pressure was on, and Sarah knew there was no time to lose. "Move," she shouted, as the team began running for the exit, heartbeats syncing with the rapidly ticking timer. The facility's destruction would send shockwaves across the alien fleet. This was the moment they had been fighting for, the one that would make Zarth and the Gorthai realize that their invasion was not as inevitable as they had once thought. But Sarah also knew one thing: Earth was just getting started. The explosion rocked the facility, sending a shockwave that rattled the ground beneath their feet. Sarah felt the blast reverberate through the air, even as her team raced through the darkened corridors, the countdown timer still ticking in their minds. They didn't know how much time they had left, but they knew they couldn't afford to waste a single second. The mission had been a success. They disabled the alien reactor, crippling one of their most dangerous weapons. But now they had to get out before the whole installation was swallowed by its own devastation. The emergency lights flickered on, casting eerie shadows on the walls as they sprinted toward the exit. The sound of heavy boots pounding the metal floors echoed through the complex, drowning out everything except the frantic pace of their escape. Sarah led the way, her mind focused solely on one thing: survival. The blast they'd triggered had caused massive structural damage, and the facility was falling apart. They had to get to the extraction point, but the Gorthai were far from defeated. The alarm systems had gone off, and reinforcements would be arriving soon. Ortiz, the young sergeant, was the last to exit through the narrow corridor when an explosion from a collapsing support beam blocked his path. A thick cloud of dust filled the air, and for a moment, there was a terrifying silence. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she turned back, eyes scanning through the smoke for any sign of him. "Ortiz," she called out, her voice rising above the chaos. He emerged from the dust, a bit battered but alive. His eyes locked onto Sarah's with a mixture of relief and determination. "I'm good, ma'am. Let's go." He gave a quick nod and signaled to the rest of the team. They didn't waste time celebrating. The blast had caught them by surprise, but there was no room for distractions. Their extraction point was still a few kilometers away, and they had to move quickly if they were going to escape before the facility collapsed entirely. The aliens would be closing in on them any moment, and the thought of being caught in the wreckage of the facility was a fate worse than death. As they pushed forward, the team began to notice something that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. The Gorthai were retreating. In their panic to respond to the explosion, the aliens were pulling back. It didn't make sense. The Gorthai never retreated without a plan, especially not when they held the advantage. It was almost as if they were preparing for something bigger, something more dangerous. Sarah's suspicion grew as they neared the surface. As they exited the facility, the sight before them confirmed her fears. Above, in the darkened sky, massive Gorthai ships hovered ominously, their weapons primed and ready. The first wave of retaliatory fire crashed down in front of them, shaking the ground and sending a cloud of debris into the air. "Move, now," Sarah barked as she pushed her team into the waiting transports. The Gorthai were going to retaliate, and they were doing so with a ferocity that left no room for doubt. Their failure to stop the attack on the weapons facility would not go unpunished. As the team sped away from the chaos, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The explosion had dealt a significant blow to the alien forces, but it had also sparked something deeper, a fury within the Gorthai that they hadn't seen before. If the aliens wanted to send a message, they'd just begun. Back in the command center, the news spread quickly. The mission had been a success, but the cost was already becoming clear. Earth had made a statement, but the Gorthai were not going to let this go quietly. They would retaliate with everything they had. The war was about to escalate to a level no one had expected. Sarah, her face grim, stood at the center of the room, looking at the live feeds from across the globe. The resistance had grown stronger, yes, but the Gorthai were far from finished. They had seen humanity's resilience, and now they would show their true power. "We've opened the door," Sarah said quietly, addressing her team. "But we're not through yet. Get ready, everyone. This war is just getting started." The Gorthai retaliation came swiftly, as Sarah had feared. The news of the destruction of their weapons facility spread like wildfire through the alien ranks, and they wasted no time in launching a full-scale counterattack. The once proud invaders, who had believed their conquest of Earth to be a formality, now found themselves reeling. But their anger and frustration had turned into something far more dangerous, a blind fury that was pushing them to escalate the war in ways no one could predict. Back in the command center, Sarah stood at the center of a tense briefing room, watching the feeds from around the globe. The first wave of retaliation had begun with orbital bombardments on Earth's major cities. New York, London, Beijing, and others were now in ruins. The Gorthai had shown no mercy. They were using weapons of mass destruction, their massive ships raining down plasma and laser fire on any remaining military strongholds and civilians who dared to resist. "We can't hold them off forever," Aiden said, his fingers flying across the console as he monitored the incoming attacks. "The Gorthai are sending everything they have. We're already seeing massive casualties, and their ships are dropping ground forces across the planet. The worst part, we don't have enough resources to fight this war on their terms." Sarah's mind raced as she analyzed the situation. They had taken a blow, yes, but they hadn't lost the fight. The resistance was still strong, and humanity was known for its adaptability and sheer willpower. Earth's military had been battered, but it wasn't out of the game yet. The cities might be in ruins, but the people were still alive, still fighting. "We need to turn the tide," Sarah said, her voice steady, but filled with the urgency of the moment. "We can't outfight them with brute force alone. We need something they don't expect." That's when the idea hit her, a plan so risky and desperate it almost seemed impossible. But in the face of certain destruction, what choice did they have? The Zorathi had offered their assistance, but what if they could do more than just fight alongside them? The Gorthai might have superior technology, but their empire was built on a foundation of control and fear, not unity. What if they could tear that foundation apart? Sarah quickly reached out to Varys, the Zorathi commander, who had remained in close contact with the resistance. She knew he had access to Gorthai communication channels, and it was time to use that to their advantage. "Varys," she said when he answered, "I need you to get me access to their command network. We're going to make them doubt their own leadership. If we can split them from within, we might have a chance." Varys' eyes narrowed, his alien features betraying no emotion. "It's dangerous," he warned. "If they find out we've infiltrated their systems, they will retaliate in ways you can't imagine." "I know," Sarah replied, her voice unwavering. "But we don't have any other options. We need to create chaos within their ranks. Distrust. Fear. If we can convince them that their own leadership is fractured, they won't know who to trust, and that might be enough to give us an opening." Varys hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'll do it, but you must be prepared for the consequences. If this fails, they will come for you with everything they have." Sarah took a deep breath. "We're already in the fight, Varys. Let's finish this." As the Zorathi commander began his mission to hack into the Gorthai's command structure, Sarah turned her attention back to the task at hand. There was no time to waste. She called together her top officers and strategists to discuss the next phase. They had to prepare for the inevitable fallout once the Gorthai realized they had been infiltrated. The next few days would determine everything. Meanwhile, the skies above Earth were darkened by the looming Gorthai ships, and the streets below were filled with chaos. Yet even in the face of overwhelming destruction, Earth's resistance remained undaunted. People took shelter in underground bunkers, set up makeshift defense lines, and continued to fight back, using the limited resources they had to strike back at the invaders. The Gorthai might have the firepower, but humanity had something far more dangerous: a will to survive. "We'll hit them where it hurts," Sarah said, as she prepared for the inevitable counterstrike. "We'll show them that no matter how many ships they bring, no matter how many weapons they throw at us, they will never break our spirit." The next few days were a blur of tension, anticipation, and hard decisions. As the Gorthai's retaliatory strikes grew fiercer, Sarah knew there was no room for failure. The plan to infiltrate the Gorthai command network was their last, best hope. If they could spark enough discord within the alien leadership, they might be able to buy Earth's forces enough time to regroup and launch a counterattack. But that time was running out. On the front lines, humanity's resilience was being tested to its absolute limits. The Gorthai had landed ground forces in major cities, and urban warfare had become a brutal, nightmarish reality. Buildings were reduced to rubble, and the streets were filled with desperate, determined civilians and soldiers alike. Yet even in the face of these overwhelming odds, Sarah saw something she hadn't seen before: hope. It was a flicker, small but undeniable, and it came from something the Gorthai never understood: unity. Back at the command center, Aiden worked around the clock with the Zorathi hackers to breach the Gorthai's command network. Hours turned into days as they navigated layers of alien encryption, hacking into the very heart of the Gorthai's communications. If they were successful, the ripple effect would be immediate. The alien leadership would be torn apart by paranoia, unable to trust one another. It was their only chance to create a fracture large enough to destabilize their operations. Sarah spent those days on the front lines, coordinating attacks, planning defenses, and rallying the survivors who had begun to fight in earnest. She saw families band together, former enemies setting aside old grudges to stand side by side in the face of extinction. Each day brought new losses, but it also brought new victories. Small, significant victories that made Sarah believe that humanity could still win this. Then, the moment came. It was a single message, an intercepted transmission between Gorthai commanders, that triggered the unraveling. The message was simple, almost innocent in its content, but in the context of the Gorthai's rigid, hierarchical structure, it was a bombshell. Zarth's leadership had been questioned publicly by one of his own generals, a high-ranking officer who had been corrupted by the Zorathi rebellion. The Gorthai, so used to unquestioning loyalty, had begun to splinter. Aiden's voice crackled over the comms, filled with a rare sense of triumph. "It's done. The fracture's been created. We've hacked their system and exposed Zarth's weaknesses to his commanders. They're already starting to turn on him." Sarah's heart raced as she absorbed the gravity of what had just happened. The Gorthai were no longer a united front. They were divided, suspicious, and weak. Zarth's grip on power was slipping, and the rebellion within his ranks had started to grow. What had once been an unassailable empire was now on the brink of collapse. But there was no time to savor the moment. Sarah's voice was calm but urgent as she gave the next set of orders. "Now we hit them hard. We have to capitalize on this opening. Aiden, do we have control over their communications?" "We have full control now. I can scramble their coordination efforts, make them think they're under attack from all sides." "Perfect. We move in on their ground forces. No more hesitation." The final phase of the operation began. Earth's forces, bolstered by the Zorathi and coordinated from multiple fronts, attacked the alien strongholds with a precision and ferocity that stunned even the Gorthai. The alien ground forces, already divided by distrust, were unable to mount an effective defense. Each strike was met with confusion and chaos as commanders turned against each other, unable to trust their own soldiers. As Sarah led the charge into the heart of the alien-controlled zones, she could see the results of their strategy. The Gorthai, once an unstoppable juggernaut, were now splintering from within. Their ships faltered in the skies as their communication systems buckled under the strain. The battlefield became a sea of confusion, and Earth's forces, driven by the belief that victory was not just possible, but imminent, pushed forward. When Sarah finally stood before the remains of the Gorthai leadership's command center, she knew the war was not over. But it was no longer a fight for survival. It was a fight for dominance. The Gorthai had underestimated humanity. They had underestimated the sheer force of will that lived within every person on Earth. The war had changed, and so had Sarah. She wasn't just leading the resistance anymore. She was leading humanity into a new era. The Gorthai had learned the hard way that no empire could withstand the relentless tide of determination that came from those who refused to give up, no matter the odds. Earth fights for its future, she whispered, watching as the last of the alien ships fell from the sky, their reign of terror crumbling beneath the weight of humanity's defiance. And Earth will win.